Hey everybody, Chris from Kaymar, and today we're going to be taking one of these, fitting all of this, and turning it into this. Okay, let's have a look what we got here. This is Kaymar's latest offering for the MY 2022 300 Series LandCruiser. And what we've got here is a full complete bar, double jerry can holder for the right hand side, and spare wheel carrier for the left hand side. Now don't be daunted by the number of components. This is a little different to the traditional Kaymar bars, but each of the components is a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to assemble. So before we go into too much detail on the floor here, why don't we get started taking the car apart. Okay, so we want to get the bumper off, but before we can do that, we want to remove the wheel spats and the mud flaps. And to do that, we've got a series of screws and scrivets on the inside of those. So let's go ahead and take them out. Once you're taking your clips and screws out of the wheel arch, pro tip for you, if you pry it from this end, the clips are lighter at this end than they are at that end. It's a lot easier to take out. Okay, so once you've got the mud flaps and the wheel spats off, next thing you want to do is undo the series of screws, bolts underneath the back edge. There's a few on the side and a few to the center. There is two scrivets here holding the center cover on. You don't necessarily need to take that off yet. It will come off with the bumper complete. All right, next step, we want to remove the top section of the trims around the bumper. So we open the tailgate up. There's two trims either side of the tail lights and this step tread, all of which are just held in place with standard clips, a light pry with a body clip tool, and they should come out easy enough. For the lower one, remove the cover plate for the spare wheel access, pry the back edge. There's a series of clips. Clips are located on the indent parts. Once you've got all of those, the back side needs to come up and out at an angle. Easiest if you pry the corners first and then use them as a handhold to pull upward. And out she comes. Once the covers are off, there's a series of screws behind here that you need to remove. Just noting that the two corner caps don't need to come off the bumper. Before you go and try and remove the bumper, one last thing is there's two scrivets at the top corners, the forward corners there. There's also a loom plug in here that needs to be disconnected. The loom plug has a handle on it. If you lower the release latch and push the handle forward, that pulls it out. All right, once you've got all the clips off, it's ready to pull the bumper off. All you need to do is literally pry it away from the body clips along and underneath the tail light. And repeat for the other side. All right, once the bumper's off, you can remove the support foam for the rear step. Then we need to remove the lower mount brackets for the bumper and the lower undercovers. All right, if you haven't done so already, next step is to drop the spare wheel. You can do this without taking the spare wheel out, and if you haven't bought the spare wheel carrier option for it, you obviously don't need to take it out. It does help with the later steps though of accessing some of the bolts. Okay, now that we've finished the disassembly, the first step of getting the bar on is actually modifying some of the wiring in this corner. So we need to remove the plastic cover down the bottom here and pull the loom out of it. And we need to remove this back bracket in the corner here and cut the bottom off it per the instructions. Okay, we've cut the lower part off that bracket per the instructions. So the lower part can be discarded and the top part can be reinstalled. Okay, when we're putting this back together, the earth strap against the side of the chassis here actually needs to have its bolt replaced with a M8 button head that's provided in the new kit, as there's a clearance issue to the bracket. The other one is we don't clip this lower part back on where it originally was. We cable tie it up high and we cable tie the loom to the side. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Now the wiring's in position, we're going to put the first of the upper brackets on. So the upper bracket literally sits in place. Before you do that, we're going to sit the fasteners in behind it. There's spaces allocated with the hexes cut for the M12s to sit in and lock in place. 3 M12s on the outboard side, 1 M8 on the forward face. Then we can just sit that in on top. It'll stay there under its own weight, and we'll pass the 150mm long M12 front to back through the chassis hole and sit the large washer and nut on the back face. Just doing these up lightly at the moment. We'll tighten these up later when everything's in position. Okay, now we're going to assemble the right-hand lower bracket. We're also going to assemble the right-hand step support. So we take the right-hand lower bracket and we put the 2 M10 bolts into the hexes at the back. We take the 160mm long M12 bolt, sit that into the place here, and then we're going to bring this up from the bottom, passing that through the hole in the chassis. Holding that in place, sit your step support on the top and do the nut up on it. These can just be left lightly tightened for now. All right, now we take the 110mm long bolt and we pass it in through the side. All right, and on this side we're placing a large washer and nut. It needs to be fed up behind the body mount here. Now it is a tight gap, it can be done, but if you're having trouble doing it, you can remove the lower portion of the body mount to help you. Okay, with everything sitting in position and loose, the last thing you want to do before you tighten the bolts is align these lower holes here so that you don't have trouble later on. What we're going to do is take the bolts that go in there for later on, the 2 larger M12s. We're going to visually line these holes up and then we're going to tighten them in position with these. Okay, with that located in position, we can go ahead and tighten the other bolts. So 1 through the front, 1 through the top, and the 1 through the side to the prescribed torques. With everything tightened, you can now remove these bottom bolts. We're going to use them again when we mount the swing arm on. And the last step is to secure the wiring loom to the back gusset at the top here, and then you can move on to repeat that process for the left-hand side. Okay, with the outer bracket reassembled, we need to get the center section in place. There's 2 inboard brackets, a left and a right hand. They sit over the top of the chassis. The right hand one should have the upper mount to the right hand side, left hand one should have the left hand. Sit them in place, take another one of the long 150mm bolts, pass it up through the bottom and do the nut up on top. With these loosely positioned, Centralise the bolt on the top edge of each of the tabs. Hold the inboard side hard in place while you're doing it and tighten the bolts up. All right, with the brackets on, you can sit the center panel in place. So that can literally sit straight over the top, and we've got two M10 fasteners that just locate onto it. For now, leave this loose because we'll adjust this to position once the swing arms are on. Okay, now it's time to put on the swing arms. The swing arms come pre-assembled. So they come pre-assembled with the pivot and the swing arm together with all the bearing hub in place. They also come with the light pre-installed for you. So all of this big assembly, while it is a little bit larger and heavier, all we have to do with this one is sit it in place over the 3 studs to start with, and then we can do a nut up on the inside. Okay, with the arms loosely in place, the best thing to do to start with is lift it to its highest adjustment position and just nip up that outer corner bolt. With that in position, swing the arm around and let's have a look at the alignment to see how it looks. First thing we want to check is both the top of this to see how far off we're in height and the back face. Back face is more important at this stage to make sure that we've got the alignment, because as you do that rotation, it's going to alter the height. So looking along this, I need to rotate this face out a little, which essentially is me pushing this down. It's only lightly tightened at the moment, so it doesn't take much to change that angle. We've now got that alignment back. It's also lowered this height slightly, so I don't need to change that as much. So we'll go ahead and lower this down. We're also going to do the bottom bolts up this time, because as you pull up each of these fasteners, it can change its position slightly, and we'll see how that sits. Okay, I've nipped the bottom bolt up, and what I've noticed is that this is running on an upwards angle. So the easiest way to check that is sit a bit of timber, a bit of steel, a straight edge, something across the top of the whole assembly here, and just check the alignment of this to that. If you are finding this is running up or downhill, the correction for that is the included shims in the kit. There's an upper shim and a lower shim. By putting in an upper shim, you're essentially pushing the upper part of the pivot away, which is going to incline the arm up. So that's a fix for if the arm's running downwards towards the center. This arm's running upwards, so I'll install a lower shim, pushing the lower part of the pivot out and lowering the angle of the arm down. It does mean that I need to take this off and reinstall it with the shim now. Okay, so we've got that all nice and aligned now, both on the rear face and the top surface. So we can go ahead now, install the last of these fasteners and tighten all this up, and we can repeat the process for the left-hand side. Okay, we've got the left hand and right hand in position and aligned. Next thing we want to do is install the locators. So the locators mount on the inside face here. One side has the stud already poking through, so we'll put the nut on that. The other side runs an M10 through behind it. This sets the end position for the arm, and what can be used with this is the shim kit as well, so that we can space this out to set the right position. Let's start without any and see where it sits. Okay, we've got this bit on. Two things with this, it has adjustment left, right and up, down, and you will need to centralise it so that these two outer pieces here are locate around the boss in the centre. When you've got it into a suitable position, check how your door closes and how this door aligns. If the door's sitting inboard too far, we need to install some shims to bring that latch out to get it to sit right. Ultimately, the door should be sitting about 2 to 3 mil outboard so that the rubber can be compressed when the handle's done up. Okay, so we've used 2 shims to space this out to get a nice gap sitting on there for now. One last thing before we lock this in place is these two outside points here need to line up visually with the threaded holes because they'll be used to secure this door back when you're not using a carrier. Last thing to put on is the latch. The latch mounts onto this face here. Similar to the locator, it can be shimmed out, but we'll shim that accordingly once we put the carrier on at the end. For now, let's just put that on and we'll loosely locate it. And then we can proceed to repeat that for the left-hand side. Okay, with the swing arms, locators and latches all in position, let's put on the lower lips at the back. These basically sit on over the top here, and we're going to put in a black button head M10 through there and an M12 up through the bottom to locate it. Okay, with the lower lip loosely in position, you've got two levels of adjustment. The lower position here allows for in-out ability. The left-hand position has a little bit of in-out, but more so up-down. For now, we're more concerned with getting this end in the right position for the wing, and we'll come back and make sure this is right later once the carrier's on and bolted up hard. So for here, what I suggest is pulling it outward and downward as far as possible while you do it up, and the lower piece in as far as possible to make sure that end's aligned. Once that's all in position, we'll repeat this for the left-hand side. Okay, now that we've got the lips on, we want to put the wings on. To get the wings on, we've got some bracketry associated with that we need to get in under the car. So we're going to put the car up. We're going to have to release the fuel filter from the right-hand side, and then we can get in for this. In the back corner up here is the fuel filter. We need to drop that down to get access to the bolt hole here to be able to put the bracket on. There's 3 bolts, one at the side, one at the back, one up here that we need to remove, and then just let that hang down. Okay, what we need to do is slip one of the M12 bolts with the large bearing washer through the rectangular hole that's behind the fuel filter. Once that's through, we can bring the bracket up from the outboard side, align the forward hole on it. A second pair of hands here would be helpful to hold that in place while we put the nut on. Okay, with the back bolt in place, we're going to put the forward bolt in, same situation. The rectangular hole for this one is above the cross member that was supporting the spare wheel. All right, we're just about ready to put the wing onto the right-hand side. Before we can do that, we want to fit the mud flaps to these. The factory mud flap has a little protrusion in the corner here that fits into the body line between the upper and lower parts of the bumper that needs to be trimmed off. It's fairly thin, it can be trimmed off with a knife fairly easily. Once we trim that off, we can install the mud flap to the wing with the M6 bolts and nylock nuts. Okay, with the mud flap secured to the wing, we're ready to put it in place. We're going to slip it over this forward mount and we're going to locate it with 4 M12 bolts. All right, with the wing located on the forward mount, we're going to put the rearward mount in place. Best to slip the rearward mount to the wing side first and locate that with some fasteners, then we'll bring that up to attach to the chassis mount. Okay, with the wing located now loosely, we've got the ability to manipulate that into the position that we want. Your main point of alignment is this rear surface here where it transitions to the swing arm and the lower lip. We want to get the top surface, the rear face and that lower edge to the best alignment we can so that we get a smooth shape through the corner. Best way to do that is to lift it into the position that you think's right and start tightening the fasteners. If you think it's wrong, try and move it from there or loosen them off and have another go. Okay, we've got the wing now in a nice suitable position. We've got a good alignment across the bottom edge, in the transition to the lower lip, good height. One more thing to check is make sure that your swing arm swings clear of it and doesn't bind on that edge, which it shouldn't because the lower lip is slightly longer. It should sit closer to that edge than it will to this edge. We've got a good position overall and we're locked in. We're ready now to put that fuel filter back in place. You may note that when you put that back in, it might be a little tight around where we've put the extra fastener. That's fine, just do it up around that anyway. Once you've got all that in, we can repeat the process for the left-hand side. Okay, now that we've got all our wings in position, we're ready to put our gas struts on both the doors. Open your door up, take your gas strut. You've got a left and a right hand gas strut. They're marked as such. You want the body part of the gas strut on the inboard side. We're going to loosely assemble it to both sides and then I'll show you the technique for getting it into its final position. Okay, we've got the gas strut in position. We've got the end on the inboard side located loose enough that it moves, but not too loose that it floats around. And we've got the outside tightened up. The outside needs to be tightened up enough that the locator can move, but tightly so that it stays in place when the arm's swung out. The next step is to get the gas strut into its final position. There's a tick shape on the top bracket that allows us to do that. And in that final position, the gas strut will be slightly compressed so that it doesn't hit the end stop when it fully opens. To get it into that final position, the trick to that is we close the door and then we open it quickly while sliding that bracket over. The gas strut now slides to its final position and can be tightened up there. Now repeat that for the left-hand side. All right, now we're up to the fun part of cutting the bumper. Before you cut the bumper, a couple of things. 2 inboard park sensors really should be removed and all of the loom attached to it so that we don't nick it, damage it. The 2 inboard park sensors need to be relocated onto the bar anyway, so removing them now is no problem. The lower part of the bumper and the cover can stay on. You can trim around them. I mean, you can remove them if you really want to, but there's no benefit. Provided with the kit is a cut template, which is mirrored for both corners. Sit that roughly in place, and what I find best is if you put a couple of pieces of tape on beforehand and mark a series of points across the top, then we can run a tape line across the whole bumper, which we can use. Okay, I've got a nice tape line now across the whole bumper that runs along all the marks per the cut template and the fitting instruction. I've removed the park sensors and the park sensor wiring, so we're ready to cut it. There's a few different tools that you can use to cut it. My preference is a renovator tool, tends to cut quite well. You can use an air hacksaw equally well, as long as it's got a fine blade. An angle grinder will work too. Problem is with some of the tools that generate a lot of heat is the bumper will actually glue itself back behind as you're cutting. The cut template and the line provided in the fitting instructions will generally sit right on the top of your bar, and you've got an opportunity to trim a little bit more off that once you fit the bumper to the car. So don't be too worried if you veer a little bit either side of that line. Also, a pinch weld is fitted to that when it's on the car, which will hide any inconsistencies as well. All right, the bumper's cut. Because of the renovator tool that we used, it doesn't leave a lot of dags on the edge, so it's quite clean. If you do choose to use an air saw or an angle grinder, you might find that you need to deburr the edge to be able to fit the pinch weld on. We're ready to put this back on. Before we do, there's some foam supplied that we need to apply to both sides to support the bumper, and we'll fit the bumper back on. When we're happy with the fitment, we can apply the pinch weld to the bumper and it's all done. Now the cut template that is supplied with this does tend to cut the bumper a little bit lower than needed to give you a little bit of accommodation for where parts are set. So first thing you probably want to do is check it on the car and see if you need to cut any more, and then when you're happy, pop it back off again, apply the pinch weld. Last step before you can lock the bumper into its final position is to reassemble the park sensor loom per the fitting instructions. Okay, we've got the bumper sitting in its final position where we're happy. We've got the pinch weld on, we've got the blocks in, and we've reconnected the loom for the park sensors per the instructions. We're ready to now reassemble all of the trims on the inside of the door so that we can close it and finish off the outside. So we've got the bolts across the back here and the 2 screws at the top here. We've got the step tread plates and the 2 covers for the taillights all to go back in. All right, last part of the bumper installation is to put the wheel spats back on. They need to be cut per the instructions and then clipped back on as per we took them off. All right, we're nearly done. Last step is to close the swing arm doors with either the carriers or the bolts. If you've elected to not purchase the carriers, then a supplied bolt and spacer is used to lock these doors in place, and a cover plate is here. We've got carriers for both sides to put in, so instead we bring the carrier in from behind and there's 4 bolts that locate them. Exactly the same system for both sides regardless of whether you've got a wheel carrier or a jerry can holder. So let's go ahead and put both of them on. All right, we've got all our carriers on, we're ready to go. Last step is just adjusting the hook. So the hook has multiple adjustments, both up, down, left, right, to be able to center it in the hole position. And then the third adjustment is shimming it out. The shimming out is to set the handle tension. You want the handle tension reasonably strong, but not so strong that it's impossible to use. Okay, we've got our latches all set, our handle tension's all nice. We've set some jerry cans in, we're ready to go. Ready to put the top slide on now, which is exactly per existing Kaymar products. That just slips in and bolts up, and then we can put our spare wheel on, and we're all done. One last thing, this center panel here, if you hadn't already, it has got some adjustment in out. So once you've set your final door position, you've got the ability to loosen those bolts off and slide this in and out a little bit if you want to get a nice alignment across that rear face. Otherwise, we're all done. Okay, we've got everything installed now, everything's set up, adjusted the way that we want. We've got the spare wheel mounted and we've got the jerry cans installed. We're all ready to use it. Why don't we quickly just run through some of the features of this bar. I guess some of the things that are obvious straight away that are carryover from the existing products, the things that are tried and tested. The jerry can holder in its entirety is almost exactly as per current, albeit that the mount system's changed to adapt to the new swing arms. Spare wheel carrier is slightly new, but again, it's in essence the same system that's carryover. The handle systems that we use on these and the latch systems is exactly per current. These are super strong, very reliable, always work. So we've carried that whole system over. The location system for the swing arm is also carryover. The rubber block mount for it and the location in there. The gas struts carry over from existing, and the entire pivot assembly is carryover from existing products. It's a 40mm axle shaft, automotive grade, machined hub, and automotive bearings in there as well. Very strong setup. All of the surface panels of this entire bar are all 4mm steel as per current, super strong, super reliable, and the mount system that supports all of those is well and truly designed to handle everything that you're going to throw at it. All right, that's it from us. I hope you really enjoyed that video. Thank you very much for watching. Look, we love this product here at Kaymar. We love Land Cruisers in general, but the new 300 series is an awesome car, and this is an awesome bar to match the car.